Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, then my name is Chloe and welcome to my channel. Feel free to subscribe if you want to see more videos from me. I usually post about 2 videos every week, all related to books and reading. For today's video, I thought that I would talk you guys through some of the book series that I have started but have yet to continue or to finish. And there's not all that many. I don't tend to read that many series as such. Recently I've just been reading a lot of standalones. However, I do have a fair few series that I need to continue. I have made a list, I'm not gonna lie, full transparency. I have not done all that much research or preparation for this video. I just thought I would talk you through my list of series that I have started but need to finish. And I'm not gonna go too far into details. I'm just gonna explain when I first started reading this series, potentially why I haven't continued it, and obviously I will tell you how many of the books I've read so far, how many books are in the series, just things like that. I went through my Goodreads to see which books I've read and obviously which ones are in the series, and then I've just made a list, so it's all chronological. The first series that I have on my list that I have yet to continue is the Unwind trilogy by Neil Shusterman. I've already read and finished the Arc of the Scythe trilogy by Neil Shusterman and I really enjoyed it. However, before starting that trilogy, I actually read Unwind, which is the first book in the Unwind trilogy. The reason that I read this book is because I had to read it for school as part of our English class. We read Unwind and I gave it 3 stars, I believe. I did enjoy it and I thought it was a cool premise, and sitting here now I definitely want to continue it, but at the time I was kind of reluctant to enjoy it or to want to continue it. I think because it felt very cliche, and also because of the fact that I was reading it for English class, I didn't want to enjoy it. I sort of didn't want anything I was reading for school to be enjoyable. I don't know why. I think it's just if someone tells me I have to read something, I don't want to. Looking back at it, I was just being really nitpicky with this book. I think it was really good. It's a really cool concept and I definitely want to continue with the series at some point. If you're unaware of what Unwind is about, I believe it's one of Neil Shusterman's first dystopian trilogies that he's done. The main focus is on the idea of abortion. Essentially, abortion has been made illegal, so women or other people who have babies or who are pregnant are not allowed to get abortions. It's illegal, so therefore instead of having abortions, they have the system in place where you can give up your child to be taken apart so that their organs and body parts can be used for other people that need these body parts and these organs. And in this world, everything is transplantable, everything can be used to save someone else's life. Obviously, there's this really ethical question of, is it ethically correct to allow your child to be taken apart in order to save someone else's life? Especially because we're talking about children under the age of 18, they don't have a say, their parents sort of control what they do. So that was a really interesting aspect, and I feel like I just do need to pick this series up again. I think it is actually a really good trilogy. I just was reluctant to enjoy the first one because I was reading it for school. The second series on this list is the Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children series. I have got some of the books here with me. Unlike the Unwind trilogy, I have actually read a fair few of these books. I have read Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, Hollow City, and The Library of Souls, which sort of completes the original trilogy of these books. And then I have also read A Map of Days, which sort of starts off the second trilogy that's part of this series. I believe that there is currently a 5th book in this series out, and there's also a 6th one that is coming out, or potentially has just come out, I'm not quite sure. I know that the 5th one is The Conference of the Birds, and then I think there's a sixth one. I can't quite remember. They're the ones that I need to read. I've read all of these ones so far. The 4 books in the series that I own, I have read them. I just have not picked up the 5th book yet, so I really need to do that. I really enjoyed this series the first time around when I was reading it. This series focuses on this group of children that essentially have been taken in by this woman called Miss Peregrine, who is like a shapeshifter, or they call it Evergreens, I think is how you pronounce it, which essentially means that she can change form into a bird, and every single one of these Evergreens has like a specific bird that they change into, and she changes into a peregrine. Obviously that's why her name is Miss Peregrine. Miss Peregrine looks after this group of children who all have special abilities, and they essentially live outside of the normal timeline. They don't sort of like live in one specific era or anything. They sort of switch between timelines and time zones and things. Essentially there's time travel in this. There's these like weird abilities that they have. It's just like I've really enjoyed it so far. I definitely need to get to the rest of the series, and I just like how sort of whimsical it feels, while also being in the first trilogy. I believe there's like a lot of mention of like London and the UK and Victorian London, and then going into the second trilogy they are in the US, I believe in Florida. The next series on this list is one that is very well known. I think a lot of people are in the same situation as me when it comes to series like this, and that is The Lord of the Rings. I have read, I mean obviously The Lord of the Rings is the trilogy in itself. I have read The Hobbit, and then I believe I read The Hobbit, and then I read The Fellowship of the Ring. This is another one that I picked up from like a charity shop. I read this. I just don't understand. I get that this was written like ages ago, but Tolkien literally wrote this for his children. This is like supposed to be a children's book. Why? It's difficult to read. Like, I'm a 19-year-old and I still find it difficult to read this. I understand that it's really, really obviously an amazing series, and there's a reason why it stood the test of time, but I definitely found it difficult to read this. Both The Hobbit and this. I think The Hobbit was easier, but this one was, yeah, I don't know. But I definitely do want to get to the other 2 books in this trilogy. I definitely do, because I want to be able to say that I've read The Lord of the Rings. I'm just hesitant to pick up the next book, which I do have here, and I actually really like this edition, The Two Towers. I definitely want to pick it up at some point. I've got The Two Towers. I will get to it at some point. It's no surprise that this would be on my list of books that I still need to read. I feel like a lot of people that are into reading and who sort of dip their toes in fantasy at least would have read 1 or 2 of these. On my list, I need to get to them. So, as you can probably tell, so far with this list there's been a bit of a theme of like a little bit of fantasy, a little bit of sci-fi dystopian kind of thing. This book is no different, or this series. The next series on my list is I think it's called the Ender's Saga Quartet. I know it's 4 books. I think it's called Ender's Saga. Saga. Ender's Saga. It starts with this book, which is Ender's Game. This one I did definitely watch the film before I read the book. I watched the film and I really enjoyed the concept, and then I found out that it was a quartet, and I thought it'd be really interesting because the film only focuses on what's in the first book, so I thought it'd be interesting to read the rest of the quartet. I read the first book, I didn't buy the rest of the quartet, so I definitely needed to do that at some point. Ender's Game is a really interesting sci-fi story. I can't remember when it was released. I feel like it's slightly older. First published in Great Britain in 1985, but it says copyright 1977. So let's just say this was published somewhere between the 70s and the 80s, like in that time period. So it is like an older quartet, which also I quite like the idea of sort of 70s and 80s sci-fi. I definitely want to pick more of that up. In Ender's Game, we find out that the planet is in danger of being under attack by an alien species, and we don't find so much out. We don't know that much about this alien species. Essentially, we just know that they are potentially very dangerous and they're planning an attack against Earth. So therefore, there is this sort of space fleet of, if you think like an army that's being trained in combat against these aliens, this alien species. The difference between the army that they're training is it's all done through games and like different things like that. So it's all very obviously sci-fi, and it's also, I believe that their training facilities are like out in space or something like that from what I can remember. It's all very interesting. I am usually not one for like military stories or anything like that, so reading something that's more like a sci-fi military story is really interesting. And also, most of these soldiers, actually maybe all of them, all of these people that are being trained in order to try and combat these aliens are actually children. So they're looking to find a fleet of children that would be good at defeating these aliens. In particular, they're looking for one person that has like really great ability at playing these games or something like that from what I can remember. I'm not doing a great job at saying this story, but it is honestly really interesting. This is where Ender, the main character, comes into play. He is essentially taken away from his family to go and start training this thing. He's like, yeah. Essentially in like a futuristic sci-fi space army barracks kind of thing with all these other kids. Obviously we've got sort of the conflicts between the different kids. They're all sort of put into ranks of like, you know, some of them are lower down, some of them are higher up, and the better you get at these games, the higher you go up. I think it's like you get points or something like that. And naturally, because Ender is our main character, he's obviously the special one, the chosen one. He's being specially trained in order to try and defeat these aliens, and that's essentially what this follows, is his experience of being trained with all these other kids and trying to figure out what's going on. I can't say much more without sort of giving away the majority of the plot. That's kind of what it's about. I found it really interesting. I definitely want to continue with the series to find out what happens. I can actually remember what happened at the end, both because of the film and because of this book. So I'm definitely interested in finding out what happens after the end of this book. So I definitely want to pick it up soon. Next, we've got a series of books that I do not have with me here. They are at home. I don't know why I didn't bring them, because I definitely do want to continue with this series, otherwise it wouldn't be on this list. If there's any series that I don't want to continue with, I didn't add them to this video. However, the next one that I want to talk about, the next series that I need to continue, is the Rivers of London series by Ben Aronovich, I think his name is. In the Rivers of London, we are following a police officer. I can't remember if he's a constable or if he's just a normal PC. Is that what we call them? That's a police constable. I don't know anything about police officers, don't quote me on it. He's a police officer of some sort kind. And in the first book, and this isn't a spoiler, I promise you, it says it on the blurb, I'm pretty sure from what I can remember. In the first book, he comes across a ghost. Essentially, in London, he's working in London, he comes across a ghost, and yeah, things happen after that. So this is a fantasy, it's like an urban fantasy, I think, because obviously it's set in London. It deals with the idea of the rivers, like for example the Thames, obviously that's the most well-known river in London. There's loads of smaller rivers also in London and in the UK, and as well as the rest of the world. And all these rivers have like nymphs and like different magical creatures and people living who have sort of powers to be able to control certain things. And that's kind of what it deals with. There's just magic, and it's London, and I remember it having a lot of sort of British sarcasm and humour in it, which I really enjoyed. Each book so far, I've only read the first 2 books, which is Rivers of London and Moon Over Soho, and both of them sort of had their own plots, so it's kind of like following the same person. It's a really interesting series because it is quite similar to like a crime series in the fact that you're following the same person, the same main character who is a police officer, and then it is basically dealing with different things that happen in each book. So they don't necessarily sort of bleed too much into each other, but obviously it's set in the same world, and at the same time we've got these fantasy elements. So it's a really interesting kind of series that this author's created, and I definitely want to read more. I think maybe the reason that I haven't picked them up is because I've just not been as drawn to fantasy recently, and that's why the majority of these series are more like fantasy series, because I've kind of been reading a lot more thrillers and literary fiction and horror and stuff like that. But I definitely do want to pick up the next book in this series. Because it's urban fantasy, it feels a lot easier to read in my opinion. And as I said, I just love the Britishness. I love a good British book. I do. I really vibe with the British humour and sarcasm and things like that. So I definitely want to get to it at some point. The next series is yet again a series that I don't have physically with me, and it's also another series that is magical, and it's set in London, and that is A Darker Shade of Magic by Victoria Schwab, or V.E. Schwab. I think it's V.E. Schwab this time. And I've only read the first book, and then I sort of like forgot about it, even though I know people love this series so much. I think at the time of reading it, I just wasn't in the right frame of mind. I sort of bought it while I was back in the UK and read it at some point during then, but because I was sort of on holiday, I don't know, just my brain wasn't computing, I guess, kind of forgot about it. And I definitely do want to continue it because I want to read more V.E. Schwab and Victoria Schwab. Same person, different names. If you're unaware of what A Darker Shade of Magic is about, we are essentially, once again, we're in London, but this time it's a magical London. There's loads of different Londons that all have different colours. So you've got like the red London, which I believe is the magical one, and then you've got like grey London, which is normal. Other Londons, I can't remember. There's like loads of different things. And then we are following a character who can essentially go between these different Londons, which most people can't. And then that's where my remembrance, no, where my knowledge of the series, of what I can remember, stops, because I honestly cannot remember anything after that. I would definitely have to reread the first one before I continue with the series, but I need to do it. So this video is going to hold me accountable. I need to read this series. I'm not putting a time frame on it, but I do need to read this series at some point. Next one is, once again, another book I do not have with me, because when I was moving, as I said, I haven't been reading a lot of fantasy recently, so I was like, oh, I'll just leave all my fantasy books at home. And why I did that, I don't know, because obviously now I'm not going to look at my shelves and be like, oh, I need to get the next one of that series, because I can't see it. The next series is Children of Blood and Bone by Tony Adeyemi, I think is how you pronounce her name. I don't actually know what the series is called. I just know that the first book is called Children of Blood and Bone. I've only read the first book. I believe there's only 2 out so far, and it's supposed to be a trilogy, maybe? I think. I'm not quite sure. Essentially, I need to pick up the second book at some point. Once again, I haven't been reading fantasy a lot, so therefore I have not been drawn to buying it. That's the main reason why I haven't picked up the second book in the series. I read the first book a year or 2 ago, I believe. Maybe it was only, I think it was last year actually. I think I read it at the beginning of last year, and I definitely enjoyed it at the time, and I don't think it took me that long to read, so I definitely need to get back to the series. I mean, that's kind of what I'm saying about all of them. But yeah, that is another one that I have yet to finish. The next series is one that I've got sitting on my shelf over there. I could not be asked to go and get it because that would involve moving things around, and I don't want to do that. The next series that I need to continue is the Chronicles of Narnia, which I have every intention to continue. They're such short books, they're children's books. You know, I should do it. I just haven't. I think I read the first 2 books. I think it's because the copies that I've got, where they're sort of like the cheap set you could get from the works or something, that I just have not been inclined to pick it up, but I definitely need to get to them. I think everyone knows what the Chronicle of Narnia is. No, I think everyone knows what the Chronicles of Narnia is about. We're following this world, Narnia, that's all magical and stuff happens. We follow loads of different characters throughout the whole series. I think I read the first 2. And obviously I only ever remember watching the Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, I think, of the films. I honestly don't know much else about the different stories, and I can't even remember the first two that I read, so I feel like I need to do like a read through of all of them, just like one after the other. Maybe I'll make a vlog for it because, you know, it's Narnia. The next series is the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. These are the only books by Brandon Sanderson I have read so far. I really want to pick up Skyward. Is it called? Yeah, Skyward, because that's like a sci-fi and I really liked the premise of that, so I definitely want to pick that up at some point. I also know that he has another, I mean, he has loads of series. Good old Brandy Sandy. The first book is The Final Empire. I read this a year or two ago, and I think this actually took me a month or two to get through because I sort of had read part of it and then, you know, got distracted and then came back to it later. I can't really remember my reading experience of this, but I definitely enjoyed it because otherwise I wouldn't have picked up the second book, which I have done, which is The Well of Ascension. I read this recently. It was in my February wrap-up, I believe. I really enjoyed this, and I definitely want to pick up the final book. I just, once again, fantasy is usually not my priority of like books to buy, but I definitely need to get a hold of it soon. And I do need to buy it because I'm not borrowing it from the library because I've already got the first two, so I need to complete this set. Definitely need to go and pick up the third one, and I'm really interested to find out how this whole thing ends. As you can see, these books are pretty chunky. This one in particular, I believe this was about 700 pages. This is probably about 500, I can't remember really. But they're obviously quite chunky books, so it takes me like a bit of time to get through them. And also because they're like high fantasy, it means that it's like harder to read than like a contemporary, but they're still, in my opinion, relatively easy to read. And people do say that the Mistborn trilogy is actually quite an accessible trilogy for people wanting to start high fantasy. The next series is one that I yet again do not have with me. That is the Stalking Jack the Ripper series. The reason that I started this is because I find Jack the Ripper so interesting, and I also just in general find the Victorian era to be a very interesting one. And I'd also heard that that it had something to do with like forensic science, and that it had something to do with autopsies and things like that, which I'm very interested in, so that's why I picked it up. I listened to the first book as an audiobook, and like I just don't think audiobooks are for me, so therefore I rated it like 3 stars, I think, but I was close to giving it 2 stars just because I really, like, audiobooks just don't gel with me, so I have to I have to think and be like, actually no, this book was good, I just didn't enjoy the audiobook. However, I definitely want to pick up these books physically. I think I want to reread Stalking Jack the Ripper physically to see if I actually, like, how I feel about it as a story. I just, you know, find the concept very interesting. I definitely want to pick this up, this series. However, it's not high on my priority list. I just, you know, it's there, it's on my list. And then finally, the last series that I've got, which is the most recent one that I've started, is the Amulet series, which is like a series of graphic novels. I had like literally not heard about this before until I saw it on my Libby app for the library, that it was available. I was just looking for graphic novels, and I saw that the first one in the series, which is the Stonekeeper, I think it's called. I saw it on the app, I decided to read it. It was like super quick, took me like 30 minutes or something like that. And I really enjoyed it. I believe it's like a middle grade graphic novel series, and it follows this brother and sister whose dad dies, I think, in a car crash or something like that. And then they have to move to this house, and then something happens to their mum, and then just, you know, things happen. It was really interesting. It was a really nice little middle grade graphic novel. I feel like I'm getting more into graphic novels. I literally had never read a graphic novel before like February, and then I read Amulet, and now I definitely am going to pick up more. So that is the last series that I have on this list. I hope that you enjoyed this video. As always, I'm going to give you a quick little reminder that you can always click the subscribe button if you want to see more of my videos. Click the bell button if you want to get notifications every time I post a video. You're more than welcome to like this video as well. That is really lovely. And I will see you in my next video.